everyone, Talio, it's V, the Guerrilla Economist, and I have with me the man of the hour who needs no introduction. He is our resident supremacist of all things racist, transphobic, homophobic, and humanphobic. It's the one and only Matthew Errett. You can find him on these racist websites alongside us here at Rogue, where we are the absolute the epitome of racism and bigotry right here on Rogue News. Matthew Errett, you can find him over at the CanadianPatriot.org, CanadianPatriot.org, as well as the RisingTideFoundation.net, where you can get his superlative books on the multipolar world, which is a threat and an affront to us, who are the supremacists of the unipolar world order. You can check it out right there. Order his books. And with that being said, Matthew, how are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm very good. And, we were just joking a little bit before this, but yeah, it's true. Like the way things are set up with this new weird post-truth ethic, like anything you say that has an inkling of the idea that you might know or believe that something is truthful will make you either an authoritarian, a racist, or a white supremacist, or all three of those things altogether. If you even think that maybe Russia was on the right side of history in World War II, that's actually turning you now into an argument can now be made. Well, you're a tyrannical, authoritarian, fascist, white supremacist, just like Hitler was that Nazi. Sorry, not Hitler. Sorry, Putin, who is apparently the same thing. Even in Berlin, in Germany of all places.
You say Putin, I say Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. they forbade the use of the Russian flag in their Victory Day celebrations in Germany of all places, the place that doesn't currently have swastikas because of the sacrifice of 25 million Russians that took by far the greatest hit. You're not allowed to have Russian flags.
But man, I thought it was the Americans that won World War II, and they came in with George Patton, who is the greatest military mind to have ever existed, because Hollywood told me so. And there's a statue of him in West Point, and Trump talks about him. So therefore, George Patton is the greatest ever live. He is the reincarnation of Alexander the Great, and he alone with his two pistols, Ivory and Ebony. Well, he was rooting, tooting, and shooting his way into Berlin with his Fourth Army. I thought that's what happened. You mean to tell me it wasn't the Americans who came into the war with in the fourth quarter with 5 seconds left on the clock, and that claimed victory for all?
It's crazy. Like Putin gave strong homage to during his little speech. It was a beautiful speech that he gave at the Russian Victory Day celebration, and he gave homage to the sacrifices of American and British and French and other soldiers who risked so much and died to sacrifice themselves for future generations. And he made the point as well that a lot of American and other soldiers would have liked to have been there, who were veterans of World War II, and participate with their Russian brethren in the celebrations for Victory Day, and they were forbidden by their government. The U.S. government actually forbade these veterans, who, together with the Russians at the Elba Day meeting at the River Elba, where the French, the Americans, and the British troops finally met for the first time after defeating the Nazi hordes. They just wanted they're in the last days of their lives. They wanted to be there, and they were forbidden by the government because Russia is now the new Nazi regime. The interesting thing in this whole process, and yeah, I mean, Patton, don't get me started on Patton, psychopathic Patton. The guy actually believed he was like Hannibal and Alexander the Great, and
he's a nut job.
All rolled up into like one guy.
He's a total nut job, a myth that in the middle of the war, Hollywood found his mental aptitude to be absolutely perfect to create this myth around the American military. Meanwhile, real geniuses of the war, guys who would have crushed Patton and the Fourth Army, okay, guys like this guy right here, okay,
yeah, Zhukov, yeah,
Marshal Georgy Zhukov. I mean, look at the medals on this guy. Fought the best of the SS, but you'll never hear of him in any American history book, any mention of World War II.
No.
He ground SS battalions to Pestle. You'll never hear about him, though.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. No, I mean, what we've been given is a lot. I mean, I don't want to underplay it because it is a very, very invaluable service that so many men and women devoted their lives to defeating the Hitler machine and Mussolini and fascism more generally. That has, I mean, I think a very oversimplified definition today that causes people to fall prey to this stupidity that, oh yeah, Russia is the authoritarian society that is antithetical to our rules-based democratic order, but we are the good guys. We are the heirs to those who defeated Nazism, and that's why we have democracies, and that's what Europe exemplifies, and America under Biden exemplifies is the democratic rules-based order. Whereas the reality, when you start poking on that popular myth that's being pushed into our heads all the time, a very different picture arises. And in fact, when you look at the intent, the design, the policies that are shaping the entire transatlantic community of NATO, the Five Eyes cage zone, what we see is something a lot more Nazi, that looks a lot more Nazi-esque and fascist than we would like to believe is true. And when you look at what are the economic military policies of Eurasia, you tend to find something which actually falls much more in alignment with the type of spirit that really put down the Hitler machine. And it wasn't just because it was a Hitler machine. I don't want to like oversimplify that either and make it seem like Hitler was just this super villain tyrant, you know, that was self-motivated just to like control the world and reshape the world in his image. He was a synthetic cardboard cutout. He was like, and I've said this before, he was like a Navalny that succeeded.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
That's all he
That's
was.
exactly who he was.
And the guy,
but Hollywood tells us he's like a Marvel Comics villain.
yeah, he's like that's Red Skull, right? Like he's like,
yeah, and we had to create Captain America to go to Germany using the super soldier serum to defeat Red Skull, who was taking orders directly from Hitler. And luckily, Captain America and his sidekick Bucky were able to get that done. And if it weren't for that, the war in Europe would be lost. I mean, Captain America paved the way for George Patton to come through, man. I mean, it's all part of history.
yeah, right. Didn't Patton even wanted to drop a nuclear bomb on Russia like before the war was
He did.
even over, when we were still like,
We might as well go ahead and fight the Germans.
yeah,
Because that's what we're going to do.
he's like,
we might as well fight them before they fight us over there in Russia. Let's drop the nukes on them commie Ruski bastards.
yeah, no, over the top, eh? No, I mean, but here's the thing: like you're dealing with something that's been unresolved. So we've all been told that World War II happened, we stopped it, the good guys won, it's over, it can never happen again, right? Well, it can never. That's been a mantra. Like, and so when we see things that are eugenics oriented, population control oriented, evidence that there is a power above nation states with an agenda to reduce the world to slavery, cattle-like, dumbed down, underpopulated slavery, we're like, no, that can't be anything like Nazi fascism, because that can never happen again. Nothing could ever be that evil. And so the mind just sort of filters out evidence that, in fact, the those who brought us Nazism never were punished in Nuremberg. I recently republished an article that I had actually written a few Victory Days ago, with a few tweaks to it, with a picture of Prescott Bush, you know, the patriarch of the Bush family, and Hjalmar Schacht and Hitler on the other side, as the feature image. And the point that I really wanted to hammer across in the article that I titled "For Victory Day, Isn't It Time We Think About Winning World War II?" is that when you look at the financial backers of Hitler and Mussolini and Franco, people forget about Franco, but he was going to play a big role in this global fascist New World Order. Look at who funded them. Did they fund themselves? No. Did they provide their own logistics and support? Did the Nazi war machine provide its own oil supplies, petroleum? No, not actually at all. No, without things like the Rockefeller Standard Oil machine, you couldn't have had Operation Barbarossa. You couldn't have had anything of World War II. First of all, if you hadn't had before that, if you hadn't had British secret diplomacy ensuring that the Nazis would have full control over the economies and everything else of first Poland and then Czechoslovakia, which Czechoslovakia, Alex Craner did a wonderful exposition on this in the form of 3 articles. Czechoslovakia had a superior military than Germany did in 1938 and 39. What do you got there? There's more Patton being a psychopath?
Yeah, so what the German view. I mean,
Yeah.
just to give you look, the German military, the Wehrmacht, was the most formidable army in Europe. There's no question about it. The German army, if they never went to go fight the Russians, and they had their Panzer divisions and their SS divisions in place within the Wehrmacht, and the Luftwaffe was in place, there'd be no way in hell the U.S. would have gotten 3 feet into Normandy. It wouldn't even happen. It wouldn't have even happened. And then Britain would have fallen very shortly right after France.
Yeah.
Hitler's key mistake was Operation Market Garden. So the German view is very important. When you start reading actual excerpts from the diaries of former Nazi officers, men who were on the ground, even the German high command, right? You would see that there was a great more fear, concern, and worry as it comes to the Red Army versus the Americans.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, as it came to Zhukov versus a Patton.
Yeah.
This highlight over here is a key point. And again, I love having Matthew on because every time he comes on here, we are literally dispelling narratives and propaganda and just bullshit fictional stories, man. Look, the Germans did not track Patton's movements as the key to Allied, and this is from the Hoover Institution. They never raised his name in the context of a worthy strategist. Hence, the intelligence efforts were much more focused on people like Montgomery and Eisenhower, because this was the level on which the strategic decisions were made. They don't worry about Patton.
No.
They weren't concerned about him. Rommel wasn't concerned about it. And irrespective of the George C. Scott movie, Patton was all about George Patton, supposedly, right? Rommel could care less. Why? Because he was already, the fox in the desert was already being called to the European theater in the front because they knew there was going to be a big push. Hitler's engaging with Russia and Market Garden. Yeah. This is what was going on.
Yes.
It's a Hollywood production, just like Mulvaney. That's another thing. Go ahead, man.
No, you said it, man. I mean, absolutely. And I mean, that's before we go back to Prescott Bush and the Wall Street London machine behind fascism. Before, might as well just take a moment here as well, just to restate it. Yeah, like Russia absorbed something like 89% of the Wehrmacht and the entire Nazi war machine were absorbed by Russia. Like that was the full throttle, full brunt, 25 million deaths. And I even, drank a lot of propaganda over the years before I started really exploring this history. And I also was spewing out this crap that was put in my head. I don't know where. I guess I first heard it in school, that Stalin was such a cold bastard that he didn't care about his people and he was willing just to throw his Russian soldiers right onto the front lines as cannon fodder. No, that's British imperial propaganda that came out of the Cold War. Not at all. I mean, in fact, yeah, there were cases where they didn't have the supplies needed and they fought valiantly, but the point was they were being choked. There was an economic war that Britain was even launching against Russia to undermine Russia while they were fighting the Nazis, because there was still a question in the British mind, even after Neville Chamberlain was ousted, right? The guy who actually had a program with the Round Table movement to continue the program of working with Hitler all the way up until 1940, as part of the original New World Order design of saying, okay, we could salvage this Anglo-German fascist relationship with our American counterparts in like Wall Street and carve up.
Yeah, the Nazis were, the Nazis were having conventions in Madison Square Garden right here in New York, man.
Yeah, you could see pictures of George Washington's face and the Nazi swastika at Madison Square Garden filled to the brim. People were still suffering right under the Great Depression effects. Like the full-blown effects of the New Deal had not been felt yet. It takes a lag time for these types of big infrastructure projects to bear full spiritual and material effects. So a lot of the people who had still been suffering were easily radicalizable. There you go, right there. Yeah, that was like one of many common images that you would see in New York, in Washington, full stadiums, right? Madison Square Garden you had similar things as well in Quebec. Look at that, right? George Washington right up there.
I mean, where did Hitler get the ideas? From eugenics. He got it from us and the British.
Yeah, exactly. And look at Canadian. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a Canadian who didn't have a great grandparent who at that time in the 1930s was also goose-stepping in the streets of Montreal, where we also had big Nazi Quebec parades with our Quebec Nazi, what's his name, Adrien Arcand, who was working closely with Oswald Mosley. These were all people tightly wrapped together with the New York blue blood Eastern establishment families, with Montague Norman at the City of London at the Central Bank of England, which
Right.
all of these things were highly enmeshed and consolidated from the top. And why? It's because, people, when they have economic despair, as what was the effect of the Great Depression, which hit the entire transatlantic, they become more radicalizable. They lose hope in the future. This is how you're able to recruit so many young Arabs to become members of ISIS and other things. It's because you first had to destroy the economies of Afghanistan, of Iraq, of Syria, in order to give people a sense of just nihilism and just anger and resentment, to the point that they want to blame anything, that is given to them as the cause of their woes, and they can easily become radicalizable. And that's the case of the Ukrainian Nazis today. I mean, the fact that you have now, 30 years worth of an inflammation, a rekindling of the Nazi romanticism that wasn't an issue in the 70s and 80s in Ukraine. This was a latent, negligible thing that was easy to ignore. The Stefan Bandera lovers in Ukraine, it wasn't a big thing at all. And it was only with the dismantling of the Soviet Union and the conscious rape of the economy and the people of Ukraine for 30 years under Victoria Nuland, Strobe Talbot, Soros, and others, that you were able to create a climate of despair, of anger, where people were then easily willing to then become part of these right sector Svoboda. Oh yeah, there you go, right? Yeah, Nazi swastikas and U.S. flags. Yeah,
That's crap.
this was ready to take over the control of the United States, right?
Of course, they were ready. They were priming it. What happened? And if it wasn't for the Ruskies,
and also check this out.
We would be goose stepping.
There's a special definition, actually. People are confused about the definition of fascism today, but I liked Franklin Roosevelt because at the same time, in 1938, he was dealing with the growth of this Nazi takeover potential inside of the United States. And this thing gets violent, eh? And
yeah, that's one of the an actual army veteran who's a Jewish officer.
Yeah.
Who decided to storm the stage, and this is what they did to him.
Yeah. So check this out. I'm going to read a quote from FDR on what is fascism. Okay, this is the best definition of fascism I've seen. He says, this is what he said in 1938. The first truth is that the liberty of a democracy is not safe if the people tolerate the growth of private power to a point where it becomes stronger than their democratic state itself. That, in its essence, is fascism. Ownership of government by an individual or by a group or by any other controlling private power. Among us today, a concentration of private power without equal in history is growing. This concentration is seriously impairing the economic effectiveness of private enterprise as a way of providing employment for labor and capital, as a way of assuring a more equitable distribution of income and earnings among the people of the nation as a whole. And I mean, this is like a much more cohesive, coherent understanding of what fascism actually is, as far as the power of a private interest above the actual institutions of the nation state. Which gives you a better explanation why you had the situation of things like, again, Brown Brothers Harriman. As one of many banks that Prescott Bush worked for, he worked for another one called Union Banking Corporation, which is where the majority of the Bush family fortune accrued its wealth, was in providing loans, first in the 1930s when Hitler was bankrupt. And what's his name? Kurt von Schleicher was appointed chancellor after the Nazi party got wiped out in the 1932 elections in Germany. Hitler was contemplating suicide. The Nazi coffers were empty. They were bankrupt. And what swept in to save the day? It was Prescott Bush, representing Brown Brothers Harriman, who provided a massive loan, which kept the Nazi machine going to the point that a soft coup could be arranged where very, very shortly thereafter, a corrupt, stupid Hindenburg appointed then Hitler after firing Schleicher for no good reason. There was a certain bribe in the whole thing. And then within no time whatsoever, Hitler started to work, putting into motion things like the inside job of the burning down of the Reichstag, right, which was, I think, March 1933, right when Franklin Roosevelt was consolidating his power. It should have been Schleicher. Schleicher was much more in alignment as a chancellor. His policy was based upon the Friedrich List economic platform. That was a very big movement in Germany. It was the Frederick List movement. What was Frederick List? He was the national dirigist economist. He was the guy who studied in the United States with Marquis de Lafayette in the 1830s and studied the American system of political economy. Protectionism, right? State-backed credit for big projects, internal development, the development of the cultivation of the powers of the mind by investing in industry and new scientific discoveries to overcome the limits of growth. That's Friedrich List. And the List movement was so strong at this period in Germany, and it was entirely based upon what was being reactivated under the Lincoln revival that was occurring by the bipartisan coalition within the Democratic and Republican Party, because you had traitors and you had patriots within both parties who worked together in the 1920s and 30s to fight against the League of Nations, the push for a one world government in 1919 and all the way up through the 1930s. That fight back against it occurred by patriots, Republican and Democrat, like I said, in the U.S., who said they don't want to sacrifice their sovereignty on an altar of this post one world or post nation state order. FDR was their selected champion, and he fought valiantly, and he sabotaged the growth. I've talked about this before, but it's always worth repeating, especially on a day like today. He sabotaged the Bankers' Dictatorship Conference of the London Conference of 1933 that was run by the League of Nations in London and the Bank of International Settlements in order to solve the Great Depression, not by creating jobs of value or anything like that, not by reining in the power of private capital under a sovereign nation state. No. It was the creation of a supranational central bankers dictatorship to balance the global budgets and rein in inflation and other things through a new type of monetary system, which Roosevelt was wise enough to sabotage. He pulled the United States. It was a 6-month fight, and he pulled the U.S. delegations out of every single one of these conferences, the same way that India and China saved the world in 2009. And most people don't even know about this. When the world was dragged to the COP21 conference to create a one world government with a binding carbon reduction quota system, right? A mechanism that could enforce global reduction of carbon outputs, which is world government and depopulation. That was sabotaged because China and India played the role of Franklin Roosevelt in that time in 2009 and basically locked themselves in a room, would not participate. And at the end, it was admitted that nothing was going to happen. Then they did it again in 2021 with COP26. It was largely sabotaged, rightfully so, by India, China, and a few other countries, or Russia as well, who said they don't want to allow for any type of enforceable binding carbon reduction policy. So this is what the thing was. In the 30s, you had Prescott Bush doing this. He was indicted in 1941 after the U.S. had entered the war finally. Prescott Bush was indicted for trading with the enemies, for being a director of a Union Banking Corporation on top of Brown Brothers Harriman. And in so doing, he was integrating and working with Fritz Thyssen, who owned a bank on top of owning IG Farben, the world's fourth biggest corporation in the world that was enmeshed with Standard Oil. They had an oil cartel that was set up a little bit earlier in 1929 by the Dawes Plan. Owen Dawes was a J.P. Morgan stooge who created this Dawes Plan idea, which created this cartel, basically with Standard Oil and IG Farben as the base of the cartel that controlled the majority of the global petroleum and other vital resources. Now, Fritz Thyssen also had a bank called the Bank voor Handel in Schipvaart of the Netherlands, which is what also funded Hitler. He even wrote a book called I Paid Hitler. That was the name of the Fritz Thyssen book. And this thing was integrated with the Union Banking Corporation, which was making tons of money, providing loans and other things, investments to the Nazi machine after it was already killing both Americans and Russians and other soldiers. So you had this happen. What do you got there? What's this? 7 brands with Nazi ties that we all use. Bayer. Oh yeah, Bayer grew out of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
IG Farben.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You got probably IBM must be on that list too, I would imagine. I don't know. Oh, that's a brand.
Kodak.
Kodak came out of that. That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
You can go for more benign
know
things
that.
like Pepsi Cola. They had their own little German
The
brand.
Associated Press.
Of course. Of course.
The APs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else you got on there?
Hugo.
Not Hugo
They designed
Boss.
the best. Hugo Boss. Some of the best uniforms ever, man. I mean, evil never looked so
Yeah,
cool.
Coca-Cola
Let's
there,
be
yeah.
honest. Coca-Cola,
Fanta,
Fanta.
right? That was the
That's right. Fanta
yeah,
was
their
their
cover.
thing.
Their
Then we have, of course, Volkswagen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Volkswagen.
Well, that's what the Club of Rome came out of. Aurelio Piche, who founded the
There's
Club of Rome.
IBM.
IBM. I knew they were going to be on that list.
Rassenmatt.
Yep.
The punch card that the SS would use.
Yep. And IBM was, I mean, if you look at, there's a good documentary by James Corbett who goes through Bill Gates's bio a little bit, and he just demonstrates pretty concretely that Bill Gates is a synthetic cardboard cutout. Well, we already knew that, but to what? What controls him? And it was the IBM machine that wanted to have in the late 70s. They knew that there was going to be this home computing type of revolution, but it would look a little bit shady to have IBM systems penetrating everybody's homes on personal computers and stuff. Since they had a pretty bad reputation, rightfully so, because of what they were doing, providing the computing systems to all of the Nazi concentration camps. And so they had to create a new synthetic company that didn't sound like them. And Bill Gates, I think it was his mother, who was a high-level official within IBM, on a director. His dad had a lot of overlap too, both in Planned Parenthood, as a neo-eugenics organization tied to Rockefeller.
A Sanger acolyte, his dad.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And but they had to create this new thing called, they just named it Microsoft. They stole other people's ideas, just attributed to this
Directly from Xerox.
genius geeky kid whose dad is a high-level, upper level manager oligarch. Fixated and fetishistically toying with the idea of putting viruses. Like, I think the world's first viruses for computers were not done by hackers, as we were told. They were actually released by Microsoft in order to sell antivirus software. So you can see how this analog of seeing humanity as a form of computer system that could then be modified with so-called viruses, and then selling the solution to the viruses to modify the behavior of the system. It's a logical extension. It's not like two separate worlds of computing and then human manipulation. It's very much parts of the same thing. And this poor kid, Bill Gates, had his whole life controlled. I mean, from the get-go, I think things were just charted out for what he was going to do with his life as a failed personality. And I feel a bit of sympathy for the tragedy of having this kid who could have been a human being who became this, nasty sociopath because of this conditioning. But anyway, that's what IBM was doing. So you got this whole apparatus that was never punished after Nuremberg, right? Or with Nuremberg. After World War II, all of the Standard Oil, its Rockefeller controllers were never punished. It actually continuously provided petroleum to the Nazi machine all the way up until 1945. You would not have had Operation Barbarossa if you had cut off Standard Oil. The combined U.S., like this combine of U.S. German steelworks that I mentioned was set up by this guy Dawes, produced 50.8% of Nazi pig iron throughout World War II, the entire war. 41% of universal plate. I got some other facts here. 38% of galvanized steel, 45% of the piping, and 35% of the explosives were produced because of this U.S. Industrial complex, just on that alone, on top of everything else that we just talked about. Then on top of that, you had the Bank of International Settlements that was again created under the guidance of the Bank of England. People like Montague Norman, who's the longest standing. He was called the archpriest of central banks, of central bankers. And he was in there from like 1920 all the way till 1946 or something, the longest standing governor of the Central Bank of England. This guy was the controller of Hjalmarschacht, who was trained under his supervision. He was the one who, Hjalmarschacht was the Nazi finance minister, all the way from the 20s throughout the 30s into World War II. And the Bank of International Settlements was created nominally under the Dawes Plan, but it was really a British creation, and it was designed originally, nominally, to be run by Hjalmarschacht mostly, and to be a central bank of central banks that would ensure World War I Versailles debt repayments. That was the nominal reason for it, but the real reason was something much, much darker. And it was the French, the German, and the British private central banks, and also J.P. Morgan, which was another founding member of that. And now today, I think most of the Western nations' central banks are members of the BIS. China's is as well, but China's actually fighting against it from within. So that's an interesting thing. But this thing was what was used to ensure that the Czechoslovakian, the Polish, but the Czechoslovakian, especially gold reserves, were all brought from Czechoslovakia into Nazi coffers. Every country that was gobbled up by the Nazi machine, it was the Bank of International Settlements ensuring that the monetary flows were consistently working well, even during the war itself, because it's all about business, right? You don't want to mix up business and politics. That's why we teach them in different courses today. And what was the thing that really blows my mind is it's not like there wasn't an effort around the FDR allies to destroy the Bank of International Settlements and actually punish these high-level Nazi financiers. Like, you had Harry Dexter White, Roosevelt's key guy who managed the U.S. delegation at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, that set up within a 2-week period a completely new financial architecture around a fixed exchange rate. The idea of having large-scale economic investments into big projects was supposed to be what animated it, not a Cold War. But Harry Dexter White had, people don't know this, but he had led the passage of a bill that was unanimously adopted, except by the British delegation, of course, led by John Maynard Keynes, an anti-Rooseveltian thinker. And this bill was to dissolve the Bank of International Settlements and conduct an audit of it as well. So to pull out with that audit, there would have been a lot of names, high-level names, that would have been brought into the spotlight, that would have been part of the Nuremberg Treaties tribunal. And the bank itself would have been completely dissolved as being just a defunct, useless piece of trash. It was never acted upon, though. So the Bretton Woods, institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, these things were set into motion originally as a design to just be instruments for the development of poor countries. And keep in mind, Russia, under Stalin Stalin trusted FDR enormously. And Russia was a founding member with $1 billion startup of the IMF. Russia was supposed to be a founding member of the IMF. And it was only because Franklin Roosevelt died that Henry Wallace was demoted and then fired. That was his key guy, who was the vice president, who had a broad vision for U.S., China, Russia collaboration in the post-war age. Harry Dexter White, also a huge anti-imperialist, shared the same vision. He was the first director of the IMF, who died under very, very mysterious circumstances during one of these House of Un-American Activity Commission hearings, where he was basically campaigning for Henry Wallace's election in 1948 as the Progressive Party, which would have completely shifted the trajectory of history. So he had Dexter White campaigning for him while serving as director of the Bank of the IMF. And Dexter White dies in 1948 on the steps of a courthouse. Very strange situation. And this whole dream of a proper win-win system of open economics, right? The idea of new discoveries, new inventions, large-scale Tennessee Valley Authority style projects for India, Africa, South America, all of this was sabotaged. And instead, what you had were nuclear bombs unnecessarily dropped on a defeated Japan. The Japanese war criminals, I mentioned this, I think, our last show, but Hiro Ishii, the genocidalist sort of Mengele of Japan, was absorbed immediately into Fort Detrick, into the U.S. military-industrial complex, which became the backbone of the entire Bioterror, biowarfare division of the military, which got more powerful after 9/11. This was Hiroishi.
Yeah, which we got the wonderful coronavirus from Fort Detrick, Maryland, in the bioweapons labs.
Whatever the hell that thing is. I mean, the point is, yeah, you got pathogens that have been explored for a long time with a sort of very shadowy, very opaque, highly classified scientific apparatus, which has been maintained for many, many decades, that has carried out experimentation on Americans as well as on Koreans during the Korean War, conducting biological warfare, again, utilizing the playbook of the Japanese. That had, I mean, they had done, Hiroishi had there's over, estimates posit around 400,000 to 500,000 people, civilians and POWs from China, Russia POWs, American POWs, were experimented on in the most horrific ways under this guy and killed. They were sometimes dissected while they were still alive to see how different forms of bacteria were eating away at them that were, I mean, it was crazy, like hardcore Mengele stuff. Yeah.
Insane.
And this is the guy who was absolved of all of his sins and sucked in, just like all of the other Nazi stay-behinds, right? Like Galen and the head of Nazi intelligence, who was absorbed into the CIA, the Dulles networks that became the basis of the entire, or the controllers of the West German intelligence, and also much of East European intelligence throughout the entire Cold War. Cynthia, my wife, just, I mean, she wrote this beautiful Gladio series on this, on like, what is Operation Gladio? Going through the hardcore in depths and disgusting nature of how this whole fascist machine was used to carry out terrorist activity against the population of Europe as well as of America and Canada. That's why we had our own seemingly communist, like a lot of these fascist controlled operations that operated in these terrorist cells of domestic terror operations, like the Weather Underground, or in the case of Canada, it was the Front de Libération de Québec, the FLQ. In you had the Red Brigades in Europe, in Germany, in Italy, in the Netherlands, everywhere, and they were carrying out mailbox bombing, kidnappings. Thousands of civilians were killed. High value targets were also sometimes killed, like Pierre Laporte, the deputy premier of Quebec, was also killed by one of these operations, as was Aldo Moro, as was Enrico Mattei. So they had a multiple level of effects, desirable effects. But the fronts, these little cells, were always utilizing Maoist like they were Marxist Maoist type of fronts in order to polarize the victim population to thinking that this is Stalin. All of these little psychopathic groups of bomb makers who are reading Mao, they're all representative of Stalin and his minions. And the reality was, it was always the fascists controlling these guys. This is why the FBI was putting so much money into ensuring not Stalin, but the entire Communist Party USA by the 1960s was pretty much run by FBI informants, agents, and other things that had already, they were the Trotskyite faction. See, Trotsky and Stalin had two totally separate worldviews. That's why Stalin kicked Trotsky out of Russia. And that's how Trotsky maintained these cells, these intricate networks of conspiratorial fifth columns and deep state operations inside of Russia, which were finally purged in the 1930s, which we were told, I was told, and we were all told, by Cold Warriors who maintained a mythology that was always a paranoid Stalin just trying to destroy his enemies. There was never actually a Trotskyite conspiracy. That was a fraud. The Moscow trials were a fraud. We proved it. John Dewey, and Sidney Hook proved it with the Dewey Commission in 1939 and 40, where they absolved Trotsky of their sins in Mexico. You're like, how the hell did these guys who were actually Trotsky, they were affiliated with the Fabian Society, with the Round Table, with the Frankfurt School. These guys are the ones who created the narrative that Stalin was completely at fault and just made things up. Who are they to say what the truth is? What evidence did they even have except for Trotsky's own testimony, who was there in Mexico? They made it up. There actually was. There really was. And evidence that has been declassified in recent years only lends to the fact that there actually was this hardcore Trotsky thing. The thing is, all of the Trotskyites people like James Burnham or Albert Volstetter, or Irving Kristol, we're all Trotskyites. Sidney Hook, Trotskyites. They all became the backbone of the hardcore neocon movement that turned the USA from a Lincoln FDR type of competent society into this insane warmongering thing that saw people like Kissinger, Brzezinski amplify the insanity and just steer this into the sort of Pax Americana that was religiously anti-Russian, anti-Chinese, that is currently being reactivated in the psyche of a lot of Americans who are still suffering from the programming of like decades of this type of crap. But the fact that the Trotskyites all became the neocons is not a coincidence. It fits perfectly into the process. And this is what took back control of they took over, they purged the Communist Party of the USA, all of the unions that had been influenced by the Stalin groups. They were all purged. Stalin was killed in Russia. He was likely killed, at least, by the Doctors' Conspiracy. But then afterwards, there was a de-Stalinization campaign run by the sleeper networks of Trotskyites who had regained power in 1954 under Khrushchev, who immediately absolved in Russia. He gave his secret speech, right? And with that secret speech to the Politburo, he pretty much said, Stalin was a monster. We're going to de-Stalinize now everything, and we're going to absolve the Trotskyites of all of their problems. Grover Furr did a lot of work on this, the researcher, and with that, he also normalized what was called cybernetics. So the science of cybernetics, which is the science of control, that's at the heart of the Great Reset. Stalin had banned that as an evil science. It was a bourgeoisie evil science that had no place in Russia. He banned it. And under Khrushchev, it was not only rehabilitated, but Khrushchev gave a 1960 speech saying that this will become now the governing ideology of Russia. And it's basically using computer models and feedback loops and everything with a centralized command to control a very complex system that would be highly compartmentalized. This is what Rand Corporation brought in. So who are the Trotskyites who went and ran Rand Corp? This is like Albert Wolfstetter. They brought in cybernetics into Rand Corp that managed the entire logic and game plan of the entire Cold War. The building up of a giant missile, nuclear, mutually assured destruction system with the assumption that Russia was always going to want to dominate the world. And so we would always have to maintain this balance of terror. This whole thing came out of Rand Corp, run by former Trotskyites. Same thing, the takeover in Russia of cybernetics. Same thing in Canada when Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was a cybernetics guru. This guy was a Fabian Society fanatic, and he gave a speech as well in 1969, saying that cybernetics is the key to all of our problems, and we are going to now make this the basis of the entire Canadian government with his reforms in the 1968, 69, 70, 71, 72 that overhauled the entire government under this doctrine. And this is why people like, our assassinated Premier of Quebec, Daniel Johnson Sr., had to be killed in 1968 because he was resistant to this thing, which required that human beings be made devoid of a soul, that we have to assume that we're just these hedonistic particles fighting for more pleasure and avoidance of pain within a system that completely controls our behavior. There's no free will. There's no soul. There's no God in this system. It's just cold machinery. And so people like Daniel Johnson, being Catholic and having Catholic as like a dominant force within Quebec politically, the idea of seeing humankind as a being that has no soul that would then shape our education system reforms and everything else was antithetical and had to be fought and stopped, to the point that he was killed, no autopsy. And then right afterwards, one of his close allies, the last fighter, inside of the Quebec government, was Pierre Laporte. And how was he ritualistically killed with a chain on a cross, or a cross on a chain that strangled him to death? It was under an Operation Gladio operation that saw him under the surveillance of a branch within the RCMP that had followed him the entire time. He was kidnapped by one of these so-called Maoist cells that was the thing that sparked the martial law in Quebec in 1970 under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was always in on the big evil joke. And after a few weeks of not being willing to negotiate with the terrorists, They found Pierre Laporte's body in the trunk of a car. And in hindsight, now we can say that the actual agents of the RCMP, that branch, the Special Operations Division within the RCMP that carried this thing out, had control of an apartment unit right next to that unit that was holding him hostage for days and days and days. So it was all being done to just smother, to send a message, kind of like what they did to Gaddafi. This is what Sergei Shoigu recently made as a point. Like, why did they showcase so publicly the ritualistic murder of Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein? It was both as a message to the people, but it was mostly a message to other world leaders saying, if you resist in any way our satanic ideology, this is what's going to happen to you. You're going to get, I mean, I'm not going to go through, everyone knows what happened to Gaddafi and Saddam. And this is what Putin really bothered him. He watched these videos, especially of Gaddafi, many times over, and took this very seriously. He vowed that he would not let this happen to another statesman, which is why he put the entire Russian security apparatus into the defense of Syria and Bashar al-Assad. Not just for Bashar al-Assad, but really for the sake of the entire social cohesion of Syria, but also the entire Arab world, which has completely been saved in many ways, or a lot of time has been bought now for a new hope, a new potential to arise in that field that could rebuild a real civilizational building process once again, which needs China, because China can build things. Russia still doesn't have that economic liberty to do the sorts of things that China can do with their state-run banking system. China can emit credit for large-scale development, which is vital for Yemen, for Syria, Iraq, and beyond, which is also why Pakistan was destabilized, right? And Imran Khan was ousted. The new government, we don't yet know exactly what they're going to do, but we do know that Imran Khan definitely was working super hard on overtime to ensure that Pakistan would have a very positive set of relations, both as a node of the Silk Road that would be vital to get into Afghanistan, and also with Russia. I mean, doing all sorts of various economic deals and military deals with Russia, as are the Indians. So that's why he had to go. And we hope that the new Pakistani government won't be too weak. But we see that there's a shift, right? Like Ursula von der Leyen, whose grandfather, as far as I just read this morning, I didn't finish the article, but yeah, even her grandfather was a high-level Nazi collaborating official. So they keep it in the family. Ursula von der Leyen was deployed and sent over to India this week, where she met with Modi. And what was her message? Cut off.
Surrender or die.
Yeah, cut off all ties with Russia and China. They don't really love you. We do.
We love you. We want to subjugate you again.
Really
we want to give you the wonders of wind power. You don't need that smelly petroleum. No. Nuclear? Who needs thorium-powered nuclear plants? Yeah, have a windmill and a solar panel.
That's actually what she said. Yeah, and she literally said it's the Clean Green Initiative. What's it called? The Global Green Gateway Project. She said is what we can offer you, and we promise we can pull together $300 billion at least towards the Global Green Gateway. Where you don't have to work with China and their debt trap diplomacy, which she railed on.
Right.
Full projection. She said, we can provide you, and where would the money go? What kind of infrastructure would be built by this gateway? Just like you said, it's windmills, solar panels, digital. You could have a digital economy and have it tied to green energies and decarbonization. And that way, the energy that you accrue in your solar panels, you could then send to us, and we can give you more money, because we don't have any energy now anyway, because we've just shut down all of our hydrocarbon fuels, and we've shut down all of our nuclear, and so we need something. So please send us your solar power energy, India. And I mean, it wasn't attractive at all, but they're really delusional.
And she's over there talking energy. And what's her expertise in?
I don't know, law or something, or marketing.
Law. Another law, another lawyer, because that's what we all have in the West.
Yeah.
They should make a rule. No law. If you're a lawyer or something like along the similar lines, you should not hold public office. I mean, it's disgusting what's happening.
Yeah, they don't. Maybe if they taught law from the standpoint of justice, it would be different. But yeah, they just teach law from the standpoint of how do you win an argument using sophistry, which is really the furthest removed from truth seeking that you could imagine. It's like a sports. Actually, I had a lot. I took an elective of criminal law in university, and I was horrified that the teacher, who was actually a privy councillor of Canada, he was a law teacher, and there was about 200 students in this giant auditorium, and most of them wanted to become lawyers. I was just there because I was bored and wanted to use my left brain a bit. And his first lesson was, it doesn't matter. Some of you are going to be prosecutors, some of you will be defense. And you might think, what is true in the court case? Like, who did what? That is not your job. You don't care. Your job is to win the argument regardless. And that was what he's teaching all of these young, gullible, idiot kids who are just taking notes, sucking it all in. First lesson, there is no morality, no truth. Your job, it's like law is like sports. Your job is to beat the other team. Anyway, horrifying. So
it is.
This is the thing. Yeah, these people don't have real skills. They don't know what real value is. That's why they're going along with these programs that are obviously undercutting the ability not only of nations to exist by shutting down food production. We have examples now of crops being shut down. We talked about of fish across the United States, cattle being killed because of no good reason. Like pigs, 1 million pigs in Ireland are being killed because European carbon reduction diktats indicate that they have to reduce their methane output by a certain ratio, and so 1 million pigs have to just die.
Why don't they just kill off all of Parliament? That's you can cut a lot of methane that way.
A lot of shit could definitely be flushed, eh? No, I agree. Well, that's the thing. They'll never actually fit themselves into the overpopulation logic ever. What's good for ye is not good for me, right? But so all of the stuff, normally you'd think, well, a person who's got even half a brain, even if you're corrupt, you wouldn't go full hog and destroy the means of supporting your own constituency. Don't you need them to vote for you? Well, not if voting is not a big part of the system of democracy that you want to bring in place. But they're stupid. They're really like educated to be dumb and have no understanding of what is reality. She probably does believe on some level that windmills can actually replace nuclear power. She might actually think that. The people above her don't, but they don't care. Now, India knows what reality is. They've got over 1 billion people that they have to keep alive. They're not interested in a mass sacrifice. So increasingly what we're seeing is a vectoring, a polarization of India that was formerly on the fence, increasingly into this alliance more and more every day of the Eurasian system. We see the Philippines, which was saw a big loss for Soros and Mark Malloch Brown. Right, the nationalists, the Duterte party, and Duterte has all sorts of psych problems, but he was definitely a nationalist.
No, definitely nationalist. Yeah, Marcos's boys back in power.
Marcos's boys back in, very important. And Marcos's boys Ferdinand Jr. has made a point that the Philippine priority is going to be infrastructure development and good relations with China. Unfortunately, they still have the economic pact with the United States military that Duterte tried to cancel, and Trump even supported it. When Duterte said we want the U.S. military out, 100 days is all they have. It was the visiting forces agreement. Trump gave a speech and he said, "Yeah, we should get out of there. It's a waste of money anyway." And that freaked out the roundtable movement. And all that to say, hopefully, Marcos is going to continue his dad's fight, because his dad actually was not, just like Stalin. We were given a lot of mythologies about Stalin being this completely evil psychopath, worse than Hitler. Not at all the case. When you actually look at what Stalin was dealing with and what he did, he's not to be held accountable for like 95% of the bad things we've been told that he did by the Council on Foreign Relations and Roundtable movement and Fabian Society, who set these narratives up. They did the same thing for Marcos, who, I mean, yeah, he had martial law, but he had martial law in a time when you had the age of the economic hitmen and George Shultz out to destroy every single nation that wanted to resist the IMF globalist diktats. And if you look at what was built under Marcos Sr., who was ousted under the first color revolution funded by Soros and Mark Malloch Brown, the same duo that put in Aquino in 2010 in Philippines, who basically organized the entire operation that ran the color revolution in the United States in 2020. They've been caught doing vote fraud with their voting systems, Dominion and earlier Smartmatic in Mexico and in so many countries. It's the same duo that in 1986 ousted Marcos, brought in some Soros puppet idiot liberalizer, Coriano Aquino, And she just immediately opened up the markets, just like they did in Perestroika in Russia, to just private looting and vulture rape. So Marcos built up like threefold the roads, the infrastructure networks. He quadrupled wages, although inflation was also created to destroy to offset the wages. That was whatever. But he built up the nation in a very serious way, including with the first nuclear power plant that was never permitted to go online after he was ousted. So, this is what's coming back. The Anglo-American military complex has lost a foothold as part of their ring around China, that they very much needed Philippines to be that satrap colony as part of the encirclement of China, just like they're doing on Russia's perimeter. You got a certain pushback in South Korea. They just had elections. I don't really fully know what's going on there yet. Japan's still nuts. But the point is, you definitely have resistance. In South America, we have resistance against this Nazi Great Reset agenda with AMLO, Obrador calling for a lithium alliance, which, together with Chile and Bolivia and Argentina.
It'll be the new OPEC.
Yeah, they want to make themselves new OPEC, and that is a vitally strategic resource. They represent the majority of it on the earth. You have...
It'll be OLEC, yeah. Organization of Lithium Exporting Countries. OLEC
phenomenon, yeah, and this could grow very easily into something much more rooted in sort of a customs union idea, which like the Mercosur was originally designed to be in 2007 when it was unleashed. It was never permitted to be that under Nestor Kirchner and Christina. But you could see that moving when you have the sphere of protection by China's economic influence, which has something like 40 or 45 ports at this point in South America, Latin America as a whole. That scares the hell out of these State Department psychopaths, and also is offering major finances for infrastructure development. Plus, you have Lula da Silva now openly talking about the creation of a sewer, an alternative currency for South America and the Caribbeans to fund economic development. He could easily take over from Bolsonaro very quickly. And so that's also interesting as far as game changers are concerned. So you got all the stuff that's happening as far as a resistance to the fascist takeover of the world, the depopulation agenda, the Nazi movement of the 21st century. And it's just that we're not participating in it because, unfortunately, the Nazi power still exists, and it is running the part of the world that we happen to live in. It's we need to have the are we the baddies moment, that's going viral right now.
Hans, are we the baddies? Yes, we are the baddies.
Unfortunately, we're the baddies. There's good people, as we have to continuously amplify the good. But this parasite has taken control of many more things than people would like to admit, including the cultural influences. These are the taste that they're the thing that shapes our tastes, our identity, our education system, our music. Nothing is unaffected by this calculated Nazi process that integrated the worst elements of the Trotskyite, Bolshevik insanity through the Congress for Cultural Freedom in Frankfurt School, which was again run by George Lukács, he was a Bolshevik funded by the Rothschilds were into it, but the London Wall Street Axis were funding that back in 1917, 1918. George Lukács was the Minister of Cultural Affairs of Hungary that brought in sex ed, non-binary thinking in 1918, who was the godfather of the entire critical race theory, Frankfurt School crap that has infested our entire post-World War II age, and especially the young generation who are under 30 at this point are really getting that heavy. If you say that there's, and this ties into what we're playing with at the very beginning, but if you say that there's such a thing as a truth, it means you're a white supremacist fascist. All roads lead to white supremacy in this mode of thinking.
In fact, roads are racist, man. It's when you're on a road, that means you're a white supremacist because you have somewhere to be. That's why
especially Cecil Rhodes is racist.
Especially yes, especially Cecil Rhodes. Very well said.
Yeah.
Matthew Ehret, thank you so much for joining us, sir. And again, folks, you can go check him out at CanadianPatriot.org, CanadianPatriot.org, RisingTideFoundation.net. Get the books. Volume 3 is out. Birth of a Eurasian Manifest Destiny. Understand what the real founding will is of the founders and why we are fighting today. Understand how America's multipolar destiny was robbed from her. And with that being said, we are over and out, and we'll be back tomorrow morning. Same bad time, same Gorilla channel for Cuss with Gus. Cheers.